It might come as a shock to you to learn that there are currently 2 wars being fought in Europe. You know, of course, about the pitched battle between Ukraine and Russia, with relentless artillery shelling, swarms of drones flying over the battlefield, and F-16s or Mirage 2000s patrolling the skies. But there's another type of war happening at the same time. This one is being fought in the shadows, and it also involves Ukraine and Russia. In the second war, ordinary people have become extraordinary saboteurs. They are Ukraine's resistance, and they're breaking Russia's front line from within. So let's find out more about this shadow war and how Ukraine is going deep undercover to break Russia's front lines. Now, this isn't just a small cell of volunteers trying to push Ukraine to victory in minuscule increments. It's actually a deep cover resistance network with a sprawling web of partisans, undercover operatives, and even double agents. Those involved all have a singular goal: conduct extremely effective behind-the-line sabotage so Russia can't start and sustain an invasion. This isn't the first time deep cover operations and resistance cells have been involved in this war. On October 11, 2025, Ukrainian partisans who had infiltrated the Russian military prevented a planned offensive near Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region. The agents embedded themselves into Russia's 82nd Motor Rifle Regiment and lived among Russian soldiers, becoming a regular part of the ranks. Once inside, they contacted Ukrainian intelligence and provided precise coordinates of Russian artillery positions, armored vehicles, and troop concentration surrounding the regiment and its adjacent units. This allowed Ukraine's defense forces to launch preemptive strikes that stopped the planned Russian assault before it could even begin. This particular operation was conducted by a group known as Atesh, an anti-Russian resistance cell group. Typically, Atesh, whose name means fire in Crimean Tatar, is made up of and recruits Ukrainians, non-Russian and Russian ethnic minorities, such as the aforementioned Crimean Tatars, in occupied territories. The actual movement started practically with the invasion itself, and by 2025, its members had managed to slowly infiltrate every part of the Russian army. However, Atesh itself is a relatively loose conglomeration of Ukrainian nationalists who want to be a part of a resistance movement. The true initiator of most of the underground operations in Ukraine is the Ukrainian military intelligence itself. This is detailed in a notable interview of Sasha from Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, or SSO, with the Ukrainian outlet Hromadske. In the interview, Sasha revealed that SSO has been quietly identifying and vetting people who are located in prime areas that can support resistance cells, namely Russian-occupied territories or those that are about to become occupied by invading forces. The profile of a typical infiltrator is someone who is patriotic and genuinely willing to carry out resistant movement tasks, but they don't enter into the operation with just good intentions and little else. The training process itself is fascinatingly comprehensive. Selected candidates undergo both remote and in-person training in secure locations outside Russian-occupied territories. The SSO teaches operatives to assess risk, blend in with others, and avoid drawing attention. For each agent, the military develops an individual behavioral plan, sometimes requiring them to join authorities, work in local administration, or even run pro-Russian websites as cover for their real activities. The operational security is airtight. Nobody, including the agent's family, is supposed to know about their activities, unless 2 relatives are both working for the SSO together. Should they be discovered, Ukraine has developed evacuation plans for each new operative. Or should an agent lose their nerve or encounter imminent threats, they're immediately evacuated alongside their families. The range of missions involved here is staggering. Unlike Atesh's movements, these people work on the civilian side of the Russian invasion. They're typically directed to tamper with local administration to slowly see discontent and dissatisfaction with the occupational authorities who are working to abruptly integrate Ukraine into Russia proper. But even these civilian missions can involve violent ways to reduce Russia's influence in occupied regions. Their efforts can also include directly destroying military supplies or assassinating soldiers. It's because of these types of missions that the SSO primarily works with extremely stable and dedicated individuals who understand the pressure they'll be under and the ramifications of their actions. And it's working beyond anyone's expectations. The scope and reach of these operations has expanded from simple recon to extensive sabotage, and even widespread tactical strikes hundreds of miles away from the actual front line. For that, the SSO and Atesh are using a slightly different tactic. If we go back to the October 11 incursion, there's another important part of the social media announcement. Even among the elite units of the enemy army, there are those willing to help Ukraine for a fair reward. This implies Ukrainian intelligence and undercover groups can use Russian troops, more specifically Russian ethnic minorities, or even conscripted Ukrainians. Simply put, the support for Ukraine is so widespread that it seeped into the Russian military itself, and if the opposition is paying enough, they're willing to become a part of the operation. According to Zokar, a 20-year-old Atesh coordinator, the movement has agents not only throughout occupied Ukraine, but also in cities and regions across Russia, with recruitment posters appearing on telegraph poles as far as Siberia. The movement has successfully infiltrated Russian defense industry plants and military units, providing detailed intelligence that enables precision Ukrainian strikes. And the sheer number of notable incidents involving Ukrainian resistance cells is overwhelming. In late November 2023, Ukrainian saboteurs managed to place explosives on a Russian freight train carrying diesel and jet fuel roughly 3,000 miles from the Ukrainian border, timing the blast to occur inside the 9-mile-long Severomusky tunnel through Siberia's mountains. The target wasn't just the train, but also the tunnel itself. Unlike other overland routes, destroying a tunnel has significant ramifications. With exposed railways, new tracks can easily be put in place, and new trains can begin running through in a matter of weeks. However, this tunnel was a vital link between Russia and China, which has become one of the most important exporters of munitions and weapons to Russia to keep the aggression coming. It took decades for the tunnel to become fully operational, owing it to its being one of the longest such tunnels in the world. Destroying the tunnel itself inflicted much more damage, practically preventing Russia from using that part of the rail for months or even years until they could clear the rubble and make the tunnel stable enough for consistent traffic. Then in April 2025, a pro-Ukrainian partisan, embedded within Russia's center military group, conducted a sabotage operation on the Donetsk front, setting a Russian tank on fire. The agent chose a moment when Russians were installing additional armor on the tank and struck while mechanics were drinking, reducing their alertness. After destroying the tank and causing a blaze, the agent withdrew undetected to a safe location. A few months later, in June, Ukrainian agents sabotaged an electrical substation in Kaliningrad, Russia, causing $5 million in damage and cutting electricity to military production site. The agents drained coolant from the power transformer before setting the facility ablaze, significantly damaging nearby Russian military installations. And finally, in October 2025, Atesh Partisan struck a railway nearly 600 miles away from Ukraine's border in Russia's Chuvaskia Republic. This is a critical supply line used to transport Shahid strike drones from the Yelabuga factory to the front line and deployment zones. That's roughly the distance from Washington, D.C. to Miami, showcasing just how deep Ukraine's reach extends into Russian territory. These infrastructural sabotages are a particular focus for Ukrainian movements, as railways and military plants remain the lifeline for Russia's war machine itself. The railway operations themselves are vital for denying Russia the ability to funnel its numerical advantages to the actual front line. In fact, in 2023 alone, Ukrainian resistance groups in the Zaporizhia region executed 10 successful railway sabotage operations. To counter this increased activity surrounding railways, the Russian military has opted to return to using some of its Soviet-era armored trains for parts of its supply runs and operations. The armored trains contain a mix of troop transports, cargo cars, and offensive and defensive weapons such as autocannons, integrated infantry fighting vehicle chassis, or anti-aircraft guns. The trains also ideally have more options for surveillance and recon operations, while also allowing Russia to carry emergency track repair equipment on hand. But the use of armored trains in battle plateaued during the Cold War for a reason. A train is much less maneuverable than an actual tracked or wheeled vehicle. In addition, train schedules are much more strict and predictable, and thus easier to target. Russia openly using these trains as part of supply runs showed just how damaging Ukrainian sabotage successes have been for the greater war economy and strategy. Perhaps the pinnacle of behind-the-lines operations is Operation Spiderweb, which was arguably conducted by Ukraine's SBU security service rather than resistance troops. The strategy was something completely antithetical to traditional sabotage. Ukraine managed to smuggle roughly 117 drones in trucks, then moved those trucks to 5 different air bases scattered across Russia. The most distant target was the Belaya Air Base in eastern Siberia, located some 2,670 miles away from the Russia-Ukraine border and the Frontline. Then, the drones were activated and navigated through mobile networks, conducting kamikaze strikes on the military bases. The most notable targets were aircraft, including strategic bombers like the Tu-95 or the Tu-22M3, which are no longer being produced by Russia and are therefore impossible to recoup. A total of 41 bombers were destroyed or damaged, which is estimated to be a third of Russia's entire nuclear bomber arsenal. Think about that for a moment. Ukraine managed to position drones inside Russia, maintain operational security across practically the entire continent, and execute coordinated strikes on some of Russia's most heavily defended military installations. The economic calculus here is staggering. While the exact cost of Operation Spiderweb aren't publicly disclosed, we can extrapolate that info from previous operations. Ukraine's earlier drone attack on Russian air bases destroyed aircraft worth billions of dollars using drones costing mere hundreds of thousands. A cost-exchange ratio that makes even Ukraine's famous FPV drone strikes on tanks look modest by comparison. And Atesh wasn't silent either. In concert with Operation Spiderweb, Atesh also conducted a railway sabotage on the Volnovakha-Mariupol railway line, which vitally services the occupied territory and bypasses the Crimean Bridge. The 1-2 punch of the largest long-range strike, combined with traditional sabotage, showcases the intent behind Ukrainian resistance cells in Russia. By distributing strikes across vast swathes of territory, Russia is being bled economically and strategically. Meanwhile, the psychological impact on Russian forces has been profound and measurable. Russian military personnel now have to fear which Ukrainian resistance agents will go into action during sabotage operations. Sure, damaging equipment in military bases through explosives and drones is one thing. Those are only tanks and aircraft that weren't being actively used. However, those agents can also deliver poisoned food, plant explosives under vehicles and time to detonate while the vehicle is in motion, and provide direct intelligence on unit movements so entire regiments can be mowed down from afar with a single air raid. These fears aren't unfounded. In November 2023, 26 Russian military personnel were poisoned and 5 were killed by a missile strike. So, imagine being a Russian soldier in occupied Ukraine. You can't trust the food locals serve you. The person repairing your tank might be working for Ukrainian intelligence. The e-cigarette you just bought could be rigged with explosives. Every Ukrainian you counter could be feeding information to artillery units waiting to strike your position. And you can't chalk it up to paranoia, as it might actually be happening to you or another unit. This kind of insecurity is exactly what guerrilla warfare on this personal scale is designed to create. Ultimately, the entire point is to make Russian soldiers resent being sent to the war in the first place. In one report, after failed Dnipro River crossing attempts by Russia's 70th Motor Rifle Division, Atesh reported a worsening situation among Russian forces, with entire platoons not returning from assault. The Partisan movement noted that despite devastating losses, military command continues sending troops to certain death, leading to growing numbers of Russian soldiers seeking ways to avoid combat. The strategic implications of this shadow war extend far beyond individual sabotage operations. Every train that doesn't arrive with ammunition, every fuel depot that goes up in flames, every aircraft destroyed on the ground before it can launch cruise missiles, all combine to make Russia slightly less able to pressure Ukraine each day. These small victories ultimately compound to make Ukraine's efforts that much more impressive. Russia's response, meanwhile, has been predictably brutal, but ultimately ineffective. While the FSB hunts resistant fighters by turning whole villages inside out, and resorting to mass detentions and violence against anyone deemed suspicious, the distributed nature of Ukraine's resistance network makes it nearly impossible to eradicate. When Ukraine coordinators discover double agents within their ranks, they simply isolate those cells and continue operations elsewhere. More broadly, Russia has also tried increasing security measures, deploying more elite forces to hunt partisan networks, and implementing harsher punishments for collaboration with Ukraine. Russian special services have had to assign more personnel to hunt down saboteurs, diverting resources from frontline operations. Yet, despite heightened vigilance, Ukrainian partisans continue executing successful operations throughout occupied territories and deep inside Russia. But here's where Ukraine's strategy becomes truly brilliant. Every Russian soldier assigned to hunt partisans is one fewer soldier attacking Ukrainian positions. Every security checkpoint slowing Russian logistics is one more advantage for Ukrainian forces. Every hour Russian commanders spend worrying about internal threats is an hour they're not planning offensive operations. It's also important to note that this Ukrainian resistance didn't spring from thin air. Russia and Ukraine have been practically at war with one another since 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and started its offensive campaign on Ukraine to integrate it within the Federation. If we use this timeline, Ukrainians have had 8 years to create detailed plans for counter-operations inside the country's borders, which would provide them with a vital home territory advantage when Russia started the full-on invasion in 2022. For 8 years, Ukraine has been seeing firsthand how Russia operates inside the territory that it occupies. Before Russia invaded Crimea, ordinary Ukrainians didn't really have to worry about trying to become a part of an underground movement. But for those inside Crimea after 2015, that suddenly became a reality. That to create an undercover operation has only expanded since then, resulting in the entirety of Ukraine becoming increasingly hostile to Russian operations and more prepared for what was considered inevitable. This resistance also shows us why Russia's full-on initial invasion failed in the opening hours on February 24, 2022. When Russia annexed Crimea, it did so practically without firing a single bullet. Russian special forces landed at the Sevastopol airport, occupied vital government buildings, and called for the so-called independence movement and elections. Russian President Vladimir Putin planned to use that same plan for Ukraine, with Kyiv and the Hostomel airport being the target. But Ukraine now knew the playbook and was more than prepared to deny that vital first strike that was meant to decapitate its government. And when that initial invasion plan failed, the rest of the country rallied into action. The resistance networks, established between 2014 and 2022, provided the foundation for this shadow war that's now breaking Russia's front line. Recruitment channels developed over the years allow for rapid expansion and infiltration into Russia's military. Training methods, refined through trial and error, could be deployed at scale. Intelligence networks built during the Donbas conflict could be activated across newly occupied territory. The resistant movement has also created pressure points that compound with Russia's existing financial and demographic crises. Russia has lost over 1 million fighting personnel, including those killed and severely injured over the course of 3.5 years. The toll includes over 5,000 Russian officers by May 2025, with roughly 10% of them being senior officers with the rank of major and above, including a dozen generals. The latter point is particularly devastating for Russia, as senior officers can't be replaced easily, with each position requiring years of training. But the million-person figure is a much more permanent stain on Russia's ability to wage war. With so many people missing from the military, the forces have their work cut out for them if they want to continue conscription and recruitment. Then you have to consider that Russia has practically gone through its entire military once over throughout the war, given that it started with roughly 900,000 active troops. These two factors mean that Russia is now increasingly pulling from either the highly motivated, highly desperate, or from people who actually have ulterior motives, such as being a part of the Ukrainian resistance cells. Secondly, Russia's economy is now fully focused on trying to extract as much value as possible to fund the war. The 2025 military budget was an astounding 40% of government spending, and over 7% of the total GDP, representing figures not seen since the height of the Cold War. And yet, Russia's military-industrial complex has practically collapsed. having almost no exports since the second year of the war. Everything Russia creates for the war, it needs to keep domestically, rather than creating money that would be used to fund it. This becomes a problem when the railways that are meant to transport that equipment to the front line no longer work. Suddenly, you have tanks and ammunition that are sitting in storage, which might not even be safe there, as Ukrainian resistance groups and military long-range strikes have become more than capable of targeting them. And the resistance movement is likely going to become more and more effective with time. As Russia is being drained of resources, some analysts have suggested that it would take years until it can actually replenish the supplies that are being affected by Western sanctions and immediate human losses. With every desperate move Russia is trying, the resistance has more time for infiltration and more openings to exploit. Thanks for watching. Now, to understand how Ukraine revolutionized modern drone warfare to complement these resistance operations, check out our analysis of Ukraine's asymmetric warfare capabilities. And to stay up to date with the war's progress and other vital events in global geopolitics, subscribe to the Military Show for daily videos.